Now, as promised, the news in detail. We begin with Iran, which says it has passed its uranium enrichment cap set under the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran's nuclear agency spokesman says Tehran will continue reducing its commitments under the deal until it achieves a result. Earlier, Iran also said it would not take part in any new negotiations for a new nuclear deal. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson says Tehran's uranium enrichment is within the framework of the deal as its Western signatories are not fulfilling their obligations. He says Iran's third step in reducing commitments under the nuclear deal will be stronger. This comes after Iran said it would exceed its uranium enrichment limit under the 2015 nuclear deal today. Washington says the expansion of Iran's nuclear program will only lead to further isolation and sanctions. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says a nuclear-armed Tehran would pose an even greater danger to the world. Well, Europe has urged Iran to reverse steps taken in violation of the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran says these steps to increase uranium enrichment will only be reserved if the EU meets obligations under the pact. The EU, France, Germany and Britain have condemned Iran's latest attempts to increase uranium enrichment. The UN's nuclear watchdog is inspecting if Tehran has enriched uranium above the permissible threshold. The move intensifies pressure on Europe to find any effective way around U.S. sanctions blocking Tehran's oil sales abroad. The four European JCPOA participants are coordinating to ponder their next course of action. Britain's Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt says the UK will wait for verification if Iran has breached the deal.
We'd still like to find a way to make this deal work. We're very concerned about the news that has come out today, and we will wait for independent verification by the relevant international body before deciding what next steps. But obviously, if Iran is breaching this deal, there will be very serious consequences.
Well, to discuss all of that a bit further, we're now joined by Hamid Reza, who is a political analyst, joining us now from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Hamid Reza, thank you for your time. It seems, Hamid Reza, that the U.S. and Iran and even the EU really are engaged in a diplomatic game of nerves at this point in time. What do you think? Is there any prospect of either side blinking first?
For the last year, or less than a year ago, it has been all talks between all the parties, especially the Americans. Basically, have just been Europeans speaking was just a mouthword about some mechanics, whatsoever they want to call it.
Sorry about that. We do seem to be having some technical difficulties there with Hamid Reza. We'll try to see if we can get him back on later on. Let's move on with the news for the moment, though. On to Iraq, where 3 more ISIS militants have been killed in a U.S.-led anti-terror operation in the northern Kirkuk province. Officials say U.S.-led airstrikes destroyed a militant hideout in the southern province. Meanwhile, 1 civilian has been killed and 2 others have been injured after ISIS militants attacked a village in eastern Diyala province. In Libya, meanwhile, 3 airline employees have been injured and a plane has been damaged after missile attacks on Tripoli's only functioning Metika airport. This comes hours after 7 Moroccans were killed in an airstrike on a migrant center in the town of Tajura. Morocco's Foreign Affairs Ministry says 8 people were wounded in Tajura, east of Tripoli. It says Rabat is working with Libyan authorities for evacuating the wounded and repatriating bodies. Meanwhile, hundreds of migrants from Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia protested against airstrikes. In fear of another attack, they demanded an urgent evacuation. Remaining in Africa, Sudan's army ruler General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has pledged to implement the power-sharing deal agreed upon with the opposition. Following the deal, protest leaders cancelled a nationwide day of civil disobedience later this month.
After months of violent protests, the military and protest leaders have agreed to form a joint governing body to end the political crisis. The new governing body will be presided over by a military nominee for the first 21 months and the last 18 months by a civilian.
Thanks God for this success. Now we have reached the agreement that we have been waiting for so long. That agreement needs cooperation and it needs all the trust of everybody so we can take this country forward.
The deal was brokered by Ethiopia and the African Union. The military says the time has come to work together to move forward.
Now we promise you and our brothers, we agreed with that from now. We need to move forwards and join our hands together and address each other so we can move this country forward because it has the resources to do so. And those resources are in your hands. We need to take care of them and the country needs our efforts to move forward.
136 people have been killed since a military crackdown on protesters on June the 3rd.
Elsewhere in Yemen, a Houthi missile attack has killed at least 7 pro-government soldiers in the southern province of Dhalia. Yemen's military says the missile targeted an armored vehicle of pro-government forces. It says intense fighting broke out between Houthi rebels and government forces after the attack. This comes as Houthi fighters try to recapture key military sites they lost in previous battles with pro-government forces in Dhalia. In Saudi Arabia, King Salman and British Finance Minister Philip Hamid have discussed the prospects of listing Saudi oil giant Aramco in the international stocks by 2021. Saudi Arabia hopes to raise $100 billion by selling up to 5% shares of the world's largest energy firm. The kingdom is yet to announce the place of listing, but London, New York, and Hong Kong stock exchanges have all vied for the slice of the much-touted plan. The plan is envisaged by the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to lessen Saudi Arabia's economic reliance on oil. In other news, Venezuela's opposition has agreed to restart talks with representatives of President Nicolas Maduro's government. Norway's government will mediate these negotiations, which will be held in Barbados this week. Opposition leader Juan Guaido says the Norway-brokered talks aim at negotiating an end to Maduro's dictatorship. He says Venezuela's people and allies recognize the need for a free and transparent electoral process. Meanwhile, 2 of Venezuela's largest oil refineries have halted operations following a blackout. The twin refineries together process more than 900,000 barrels of oil per day. Greece's center-right opposition party, New Democracy, has won the nation's snap general elections. With most districts counted, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras conceded defeat to his rival, Kyriakos Mitsotakis.
Greek conservatives, led by Kyriakos Mitsotakis, have scored a landslide victory in the country's snap polls. The New Democracy Party won most votes, beating the ruling Syriza party. An emotional Tsipras conceded defeat and congratulated his opponent.
We fought and achieved a lot, always with our head held high. And today again, with our heads held high, because we know that the Greece we hand over to the new government has nothing to do with the Greece we took over.
Mitsotakis called on people who had left during the country's financial crisis to return home.
Of course, our discussions with our European creditors will begin immediately, but we've made our plan very, very clear. There are no real surprises here involved. We want to drive a real reform agenda for the country that is ambitious, very bold, and very, very detailed. And of course, we've made the case that lower primary surpluses will be to the benefit of everyone.
The government handover would take place on July 8 after Mitsotakis is sworn in as the new Prime Minister.
U.S. President Donald Trump, meanwhile, has fired back at the UK envoy who called the White House inept. Trump says the envoy has not served the UK well after leaked memos revealed the diplomat's harsh words. Ambassador Kim Darroch says Trump's presidency could crash, burn, and end in disgrace. The remarks were revealed after a cache of secret cables and notes sent back to Britain were leaked. Britain's foreign ministry says it will carry out a formal investigation into the disclosure. Australia says it is tracking a Chinese surveillance ship that has positioned itself just outside of its territorial waters. The Chinese surveillance ship is expected to monitor military exercises by Australia and the United States. Around 25,000 Australian and U.S. military personnel will participate in the biannual Talisman Sabre War Games. Aircraft carriers are involved in the month-long exercises. Australia's military says the Chinese ship does not pose any real threat.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, a complete shutdown is being observed across Indian-occupied Kashmir on the third anniversary of Burhan Wani's martyrdom. Wani was martyred by Indian occupation forces in a fake encounter in occupied Kashmir on July 8, 2016. He led the Kashmiri youth's struggle against Indian occupation using social media as a channel. His martyrdom triggered the longest ever curfew in Kashmir, which was over 100 days long. During the curfew, scores of people were killed and injured by occupation forces trying to suppress dissent. Rallies and meetings will be held across Azad Jammu and Kashmir today to renew allegiance with Wani's freedom struggle. Meanwhile, 29 people have been killed and 21 others have been injured after a state-run bus fell into a large drain near Agra in India. Police suspect the driver fell asleep before the double-decker flew off a bridge on its way from Lucknow to Delhi. Officials say the bus fell over 40 feet into a river, which crushed the top deck. Around 900 people have been killed on the Yamuna Expressway since it opened in 2012. Official data shows India's roads are among the world's deadliest, where 150,000 people were killed in 2017 alone. I'll be back after a break with much more news. Stay tuned for that. Let's begin this segment of the news bulletin in Malta. A group of 58 migrants have disembarked in Valletta after they were rescued by Maltese authorities. The migrants were rescued by the charity service Alarm Phone. Maltese officials say all the migrants are in good condition. Meanwhile, another rescue boat with 65 migrants on board has not been given clearance to enter Maltese waters after Italy refused it entry. Italy's migration policy has led to clashes with charity services over rules that close off the country's ports to their boats. British Airways has been ordered to pay a record fine of $230 million for a huge customer data breach last year. It is the biggest penalty the UK's Information Commissioner Office has ever imposed. The penalty follows the theft of some 500,000 customers' personal and financial information. The data was stolen from the carrier's website and mobile app last year. The fine is equivalent to 1.5% of the airline's projected revenue for this year. British Airways says it is surprised and disappointed by the fine. It has 28 days to appeal. All right, we're going to try to go back now to Hamid Reza Ghulamzadeh, political analyst, who is joining us once again from the Iranian capital, Tehran, to speak about our top stories. Of course, that issue about Iran, the nuclear deal, etc. Hamid, thanks for joining us once again here at Indus News. What can you tell us about your thoughts about this, the tensions that are currently going on? It seems like a game of nerves, isn't it? Who will blink first, do you think?
For more than a year now, after the U.S. regime withdrew from the JCPOA, what we have seen from the European side was just speaking about some mechanism and such things, and they didn't do anything actually in practice. So what Iran needs and wants and is following is a pragmatic approach to policy and diplomacy. Yes, it is when it comes to diplomatic issues and relations, sometimes it's just words and saying and sitting to each other at the table, talking, but it's not something practical and pragmatic for Iran. Iran sat at the table from the very beginning of the negotiations over the nuclear issue to actually have some benefits from the deal. Iran was suffering from some economic problems, so it wanted to have some benefits and interest in the deal. So it accepted the limits just because of that. But from the day one after the JCPOA was signed between all the parties, even during President Obama, the United States did not fulfill its commitments, and also the European sides were not very cooperative in that regard. They were actually siding by the United States. And after the United States withdrew from the deal, the same story happened. The Americans imposed more sanctions and they put pressure on the Europeans, and all of them actually followed President Trump. But on the other side, Iran has experienced this situation and knows that there is no other choice but to be practical in that regard. If it wants some benefits from the deal, it has no other choice but to resist against such policies that the Americans and the Europeans are trying to impose on Iran. So there is no doubt that Iran would not step back unless there is some benefits that it's enjoying. The latest comments shows that if the United States lessens and decreases the sanctions, relieves some sanctions, then it would be some grounds for having the United States at the negotiating table with the other 4+1 parties of the nuclear deal.
So Hamid Reza, at this point, then obviously the ball is Europeans' court. Do you think that they will deliver, that they will be able to come up with a solution that will be acceptable for Iran?
Our experience in Iran vis-a-vis the Europeans is that they try to put pressure on Iran. We have had several cases, and Iran steps back, they will step forward and put more pressure on Iran. But if they see that how resolute Iran is and how firm it is to actually go ahead with what it has announced, they have no other choice but to step back. Because if Iran withdraws from the JCPOA totally and the deal is dead, the first group to suffer damages would be the Europeans, because they have no other options to actually work with Iran. They have no other options to, as they call it, monitor Iran or limit Iran's nuclear program. So Iran is not going to lose anything. Iran doesn't have anything to lose. It has not benefited anything. It has not actually enjoyed any release of sanctions. So if there is further sanctions or whatsoever it is, that would not be something more difficult than what we have seen for a decade almost now. So the Europeans should decide whether they are willful to work and be a rational player in international politics, be a true real players, or they want just to be puppets of the United States and whatever the President Trump and the B team and all the warmongers in the United States are going to dictate them. That's the choice for the Europeans, and I hope that they are rational players and they will step back and they will actually abide by the deal.
Hamid, Reza, as a final thought, then, many people, at least outside Iran, are saying that a military clash may be very likely at some point in time. What is the mood in Iran about that sort of possibility?
Actually, if Iranian people want to talk about war, there would be some making some jokes about that. No one is seeing any war, and anything that especially with the global hawk drone, spy drone that we had just a couple of weeks ago being downed by Iranians, showed that how serious and how powerful Iranians are in defending their integrity and their land. So for the Iranians, it is just a joke to consider that, for example, the United States with the allies in the region, like, for example, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other countries in the region, who are actually very vulnerable to not only Iran, but also the proxies of Iran, that they think of any war against Iran. You have seen that for about 5-6 years now, we have seen the Saudi Arabia and UAE fighting against the poorest country in the region, Yemen, and they are actually the richest and the country with the highest, most advanced weaponry are fighting against the poorest country in the region, in Yemen, and they are actually they have failed to do anything, and they are now suffering from the drone attacks by the Yemeni people on their airports and other strategic places. So there is actually no ground for any war, and that was actually the reason why President Trump decided not to retaliate what happened to the global hawk drone. So there is no war, I'm sure about that. If there is any war, if there would be any war, actually that would be nothing less than a third world war, because we are in a strategic region. You know how important the Persian Gulf is, and it's an energy hub. It is very strategic and geopolitically it is very important. If there is any tension, if there is any conflict in this region, that would for sure expand to other regions in the world as well.
Very well, Hamid. Reza, we'll leave there at that. As always, we appreciate you taking your time to speak to us here at Indus News. We're going to go now into business news. We're going to begin in Africa, where leaders there have launched a continental free trade zone at an African Union summit in Niger. The landmark free trade area agreement follows 17 years of tough negotiations. It was formalized after Nigeria announced it would join in.
55 African nations joined hands to economically uplift the poverty-stricken continent. The African Union says the pact will lead to a 60% boost in intra-African trade by 2022.
The free trade zone established on May 30th, 2019 is the largest exchange area in the world. Africa, with a population of 1 billion and 217 million people, will reach 1.7 billion in 2030 and 2.7 billion by 2050.
Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi says the agreement will help signatories to improve the living standards of Africans.
The eyes of the world are turned on Africa, and the success of the AFCFTA will be the real test to achieve the economic growth that will turn our people's dream of welfare and quality of life into a reality. This will reinforce our negotiating position on the international political and economic stages.
Currently, trade among African countries stands at 16% in comparison to 65% with European countries.
Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. And you're all caught up. Thanks very much for watching this bulletin here at Indus News.